Hi everybody, welcome to part 7 of our 8-part series on the Sabbath. So in next week's episode, I'm going to be answering your questions. So if you have questions about anything we've talked about or not talked about with respect to Sabbath, please leave your questions at walkingthetext.com under the various episodes, and I look forward to answering those questions next week. In this week's episode, I am entitling this Getting Super Practical. And it's a bit misleading because I hope all of the episodes at Walking the Text and in the teaching series, and primarily because we're in the Sabbath series, that they're always super practical. That we're not just learning new information, but we're being challenged on how we can walk this out in our lives. But in this episode, I want to just get really practical with how my family and I celebrate Sabbath, just to give you additional ideas around what this can look like in your life, because we've been celebrating it for 14 years. So there's lots of things that we have learned about Sabbath, and I just want to kind of instill those upon you, give those to you, even beyond many of the practical things that we've already done in this series. Now, you're actually in my living room. So our front door is right over there. My office is right here. Dining room is right over here. And you come in through this corridor, and here is our living room. And in our living room, in every house that we have lived in since my wife and I started celebrating Sabbath, we've had this frame of the Exodus 20 passage on Sabbath. My wife got this for us not long after we started celebrating Sabbath, and it's just a reminder to us of the centrality of Sabbath in our lives. And so it's always in a central place in our home. And one of the things that we have talked briefly about, but I just want to read this, is that in verse 11 of Exodus 20, after God says, take the Sabbath day, it says, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." Now I want to go to this passage in Genesis chapter 2, because in Genesis chapter 1, we have the first 6 days of creation, around what's being created. And in it we have, "It is good, and it is good, and it is good." And we have that refrain throughout. And we also have, "And there is evening, and there is morning," the first day. "And there is evening, and the morning, and there is the second day." And you've got that for the first 6 days. And then you get this in chapter 2, verse 2. "By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all of his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done." Now, just a few observations just about this, because God references it when he gives the Sabbath commandment in Exodus chapter 20. First of all, when it says "by the seventh day," that word "by" in Hebrew can also be translated "on." On the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. Now, because that can go either way, there's all these fascinating discussions among the rabbis where they say on the seventh day, God actually created something. He created the Sabbath. Now, is that really a creating? Well, you can be kind of the judge of that, but it just goes all over the place in various writings. But the point is that the seventh day, the Sabbath is introduced, and it is seminal to the climax of creation. And in this, did you notice there is no, and it is good, and it is good. There's no, and there's evening and the morning, the seventh day. It's not in the passage. And you go, well, why is that? Well, I think because there's something else in this passage that helps us to understand why. In verse 3, it says, "Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy." This word holy, which is a key word in the Bible, this is the first time it is introduced. It's the word kadosh in Hebrew. And what many scholars and theologians have pointed out is that the first thing that is made holy is not things of space, right? Not planets, not animals, not even people in Genesis chapter 1. But it is the seventh day, and it is holiness in connection to time. that the first thing that bears holiness is not things of space, but actually time, the seventh day, the Sabbath day. And the word kadosh in Hebrew means to set apart. It's different, it's other than. And I believe that what the writer is doing here in Genesis 2 does not need to say, and it is good, or there was evening in the morning, the seventh day. Because by the very presence of the word kadosh, we are met with this reality that the seventh day doesn't look or feel like any of the other days of creation. And it's supposed to be set apart, and it's supposed to feel different. And so that's what I want to do now, is talk about how the seventh day for my family is totally different than the other 6 days of the week. Now, I've mentioned this in one of the earlier episodes, but for us, Sabbath is Saturday. We got into that rhythm when I was in seminary, and I was teaching lots of places on Sundays. And then after seminary, we moved to Jerusalem. We lived in Israel for a year, and we came back. And then I was a teaching pastor again, and then became full-time in that. And so I was teaching a lot on Sundays. And so that was work for me. And so Saturday became our Sabbath. Now, I know for some people, some are really adamant about, no, Sabbath has got to be from this day to this day, or from this time to this time. And I would just say that if anybody is super, super adamant that Sabbath can only be celebrated from here to here, they've actually lost the plot. They've lost the essence of Sabbath, this gift that we don't serve, but that it serves us. Is that it has got to be, I don't think, a specific day that everybody has to adhere to, but to say, which day can you adhere to it? And for some of you, I know that even the idea of giving it an entire day is just like challenging for you. And I would just say that as you're trying to develop Sabbath, what's the next right step, that you can take? And know that for some of you, it probably will fluctuate. Some of you, God has gifted to be in the medical field. And so your hours are off on the weekends, or they change, or you're in some other profession where those hours are very erratic and you don't have any say over it. I know for me, I still have to be very flexible at times around Sabbath, because God has called me to communicate the Bible, and many of the places that I communicate, they don't just have Sunday services, they got Saturday services as well. And so my family will celebrate Sabbath, and I'll be off somewhere, but I'll need to try to figure out, okay, what does it look like for me on Monday, to change things up. But for my family and I, it's Saturday. It's what works well for us. It's a rhythm that we have been in, and that's just kind of how we do it. So what does our day look like? Okay, well, first of all, we cease, right? This has been a major component of this series, is that in order to rest, you have to cease. You have to be intentional about what you stop in order to enter into that rest. And so the ceasing for me, and as we've defined work, those things that, vie for your time and attention, that which you put yourself towards the other 6 days, like that is what you are supposed to cease from. And so for me, Saturday is a day where I'm not checking my email. I'm not making phone calls. I'm not responding to texts around walking the text or anything, that is work related. For me, I'm not studying for anything that's coming up. Now, I might study the Bible. I often do. That's a daily rhythm for me. But when I'm reading it or I'm thinking through it, I'm not thinking about a next teaching series episode or a sermon that I'm going to be giving, or, this would work really well for my upcoming trip to Israel or to Turkey, or anything like that. It's like I just read for the enjoyment of it. And I basically take everything that's associated with my walking the text and the work that I get to do in the business sector around helping companies and organizations clarify their message and helping professionals with the art of effective communication and presentation, like everything around what encompasses my world, that gets set aside. For my wife, she is largely a stay-at-home mom. She does run the books for Walking the Text because she's brilliant with finances and can organize things, and I bless her for that and bless God for her for lots of reasons, but that one in connection to walking the text. For my wife, she's not doing any accounting work. She's doing nothing along, scheduling travel for me or reimbursements or anything like that. And because she is largely a stay-at-home mom, there is no cooking. There is no cleaning. Well, we'll sometimes cook, but it's like oftentimes maybe heating something up, or if we're going to do it, we do it together, but it's not doing the laundry. We don't make beds. We don't do the dishes. Like literally, we just pile up the dishes and we don't worry about cleaning them at all. We basically take everything that she does during the week and we go, what does ceasing look like for you? And we make sure that that's part of her rhythm as well. For my kids, it's no schoolwork. So Saturday's a day where we don't do any schoolwork. We just abstain from that because for them, that's essentially, their work. And that's what our ceasing looks like. Then we rest. And we rest from the perspective, now that we've ceased, now that we can rest. And for me, it's the day of the week where I actually sleep in. I sleep until 7 o'clock because we've got 4 kids and we've got a dog that likes to also wake us up. So it's 7 o'clock for me. It's pretty much the only day during the week that I'll take a nap, and that's just, I know that there's a whole thing in the business sector right now of taking 15 to 20 minute naps, every day or several times a week and all of that. And I have not gotten into that rhythm yet. It has not worked out. But for me, that's when I get to take a break on Saturday. And so there is this rest component. We take naps and we sleep in and we try, to allow ourselves to get exhausted, if you will. We remember all the things that we've been talking about this series. You remember how we trust God, that we're not the ones who manufacture our life, and we remember that we're not beasts of burden, and that there's a rhythm and a cadence, and that we're not meant to go, and we're reminded that our work is not connected, our worth is not our work, and we need to take a break from that and to be reminded of all the many ways of just detoxing from the messaging that we get throughout the week, the smudges on the glasses that just taint our view on so many things. And so we just remember why we're actually celebrating Sabbath. And then we talk about this in terms of that we reconnect. Together as a family. That oftentimes with the work that I'm doing is there's some weeks where it is just I'm busy or I'm traveling or I'm gone, and we just reconnect as a family. I know this was one of the biggest things that got my wife through seminary, and when I was a local church teaching pastor, especially when seminary was coming along, and it was just insane how much work and hours and everything that went towards it. And my wife always knew that regardless of how busy the week was, on Saturday, I've got his attention. He is going to be fully present to me and to the kids. And so when you're in the midst of these busy weeks, that's a really great thing to have, to know, right, that there is time coming that is going to be set aside. And so we reconnect as a family, and we reconnect with God. So sometimes, right, our weeks are crazy, and maybe I'm not as intentional as I should be in spending time with God. And I'll just say, okay, I just need to spend some time with God. I know that as a family, we try to get outside and reconnect with creation. So Saturday's a day we get outside and we just enjoy just being out there. And then also just the realization that sometimes we just need to reconnect with ourselves, that it's been busy, it's been hectic, and we just need a little bit of space and a little bit of alone time. And so that's how we talk about in terms of reconnecting. And then ultimately, when we wake up on Saturday, we just try not to have an agenda. Now, things do change. I've got 4 kids. 3 of them, we're currently in basketball season. I coach my son, Denyon. My wife coaches Araya. My 7-year-old, has got a coach. And they each have, one game on Saturday. And it is fun for us because it's not something we get to do often. My kids have 1 practice a week on Monday nights. And so it is a ton of fun for us to do that. And so sometimes it can feel a little bit busy, and if we have to kind of shift, our Sabbath more into Sunday because so much of our Saturday was taken away, we just kind of, judge that and kind of figure that out. But the big thing for us is that we wake up on Saturday and we go, how can we have as much fun as possible as a family? Like, what does that look like for us today? No work, nothing. And by the way, if you ask my kids, what's your favorite day of the week? They'll say it's Sabbath. And one of the things they'll say is because we know that daddy's not going to have to work. Like, it's just one of those days where, right, I don't have to tell my kids, well, daddy's only got 10 minutes to play. Right? Because the rest of the week, it's, I get done with work, or I've got meetings, or I'm traveling and I get back, and my kids have got their schoolwork to do, and then we've got dinner, and then showers or baths, and then, we're getting them to bed. And it's just sometimes, like, throughout the week, it can just feel like its own rat race. But my kids know, like, Saturday is a day, daddy's not working, we're not going to do any schoolwork, and we're just going to have as much fun as we possibly can. And so we just look at it again from the standpoint of freedom. Like, what does freedom look like for us? And how is God going to set us free? And one of the other things that I just wanted to draw out about this is that when my wife got me this frame, when she got me this, actually just the writing first of all, is that once it got printed and as we were bringing it home before we were actually putting it in a frame, something happened, the wind blew up or whatever, and we got this gash in the actual poster itself. And my wife goes, oh man, let's just go get another one. I was like, no, actually, let's not. Because Sabbath is a day that is intended to transform us. It's a day that's intended to repair us, to make us whole. And sometimes this is what my focus is on Saturday, where it's like, man, some things happened during the week and some people said some really harsh things, or there was something that just happened and I just feel like I'm lacking. I come to Saturday and I go, dear God, will you put me back together today? My wife will do that at times. It's just the understanding that the whole idea of Sabbath is that, again, it's intended to set us free. It makes us whole. It repairs us where we feel fractured and broken. And so this is why we keep that there, is to be reminded that this is a day that's intended to make us fully alive. That if we need to be repaired, that God's going to repair us. But by and large, like, it's our favorite day. Not by and large, it is our favorite day of the week. And we come to it and we say, dear God, help us to cease well. Help us to rest well. Restore us, rejuvenate us, and set us free. And if you'll remember from our last episode, it was all about unleash the freedom. And I just want to end with this. Did you know that there was another set of 10 commandments? It's actually not 10 more new 10 commandments. It's actually the 10 commandments being given a second time. It's in Deuteronomy. Moses is just about ready to die. He's letting the next generation know about the commandments one last time before he dies, and then Joshua takes them into the land. And if you compare the 10 commandments between Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5, you will realize that they're virtually verbatim, with the exception of the Sabbath commandment. And everything in the first half of the Sabbath is pretty much identical until you come to the story. In Exodus 20, God references creation, but here in Deuteronomy, a different story is referenced. Listen to the second half of this. It says this, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Now, this for me is just absolutely mind-blowing. And I don't know, how God prompted Moses to do this, or how the Holy Spirit, put this in his heart. But it's like the children of Israel knew that we celebrate the Sabbath because God set an example, and for all the other connections that we have made. But when Moses gives it to him for the last time, he actually references Egypt. And the reason why I believe that Moses did this is because what God was trying to communicate through Moses to his people is that if you are not able to observe Sabbath, you might as well walk right back to Egypt because you are still enslaved. Friends, I pray that you experience the freedom of Sabbath. that you try to figure out, what does this look like, in our lives? How can we be intentional about observing the Sabbath day, and that everything that we have tackled in this series would become a reality for you, and that ultimately whatever is holding you back, whatever is enslaving you, whatever is restricting you from being able to celebrate the Sabbath, I pray that in the power of the Holy Spirit, that God would just break through that mold in your life and in your story and in your schedule, and allow you to experience the freedom of Sabbath, because we don't want to be people who live in Egypt. We want to be people who live in the freedom that God gives. So friends, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for listening. Again, next week we're going to be answering your questions. And one really big question, what's going on in John 5 when Jesus is asked a question pertaining to the Sabbath, and he says, well, like my Father, I'm always working. And you go, oh man, does that upend everything we've been talking about in the series? Well, I guess you're going to have to find out, because it's always based on the context. So we're going to come back to that next week. But I hope this has been super helpful to all of you and super practical. And I pray, as always, that you just walk out the text well in your life.